Today, I'm going to discuss an almost 60-year-old UFO incident that has never been debunked. Even after the Canadian and United States governments reviewed the event, they couldn't come up for any official explanation for what the people of Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, saw. Shag Harbor is a tiny fishing village, and it only has a population of a few hundred people. So it's on the night of October 4th, 1967. A local 12-year-old boy named Chris Stiles was getting ready to go to bed. And before he could get under the blankets, he saw something strange out of his bedroom window. There was something in the sky. It was round, it glowed with a soft orange tint, and it was moving. So he jumped out of bed and ran outside to get a better look. Once Chris ran to the shoreline, he felt this sudden fear come over him. So he turned and ran back into his house. Now, Chris wasn't the only person this night who saw something strange in the sky. It was another young boy, 13-year-old Peter Gorham, who was also in bed. He said he first noticed that there was something going on at around 12:30 in the morning. When Peter saw the lights, they were so bright that they almost blinded him even through the window. So Peter is sitting in bed and he keeps watching these lights just in shock. They were holding still in midair, hovering not too far above the tallest trees. But after some time, they began moving toward his house. And the closer they got, the louder those lights became. Peter said he began to hear a deafening noise, like some kind of vehicle was spiraling out of control. But then suddenly, the thing roared past his home, and that was the end of it. Another teenager named Norman Smith was pretty close to the beach when he saw the exact same glowing orange sphere hurtle toward the water. Whatever happened this night in Shag Harbor was also spotted by a pilot who was passing over the place at the same time, except his description of the light was a little different. He saw a line of lights in the shape of a backslash. They were bluish white and they were racing right toward his plane. He and the co-pilot could tell the vessel, or whatever it was very large, and it looked like it was about to turn left and cut them off, until he realized the flying lights had stopped moving entirely. Now, when the pilot called a nearby airbase to ask him, hey, what's up here? What's going on? We just passed this thing. The people at the base told him their radar didn't show anything in the sky besides his own plane. Once they were safe and there was no danger of colliding, the lights just began moving again, and they went from a complete standstill to speeding away at more than 2,000 miles per hour in less than a second. They watched it move in a way that should have been impossible, assuming it was designed using any known technology. Other Shag Harbor residents said they saw 4 orange lights flashing on and off in sequence. It also made a whistling sound as it flew. One man even thought he saw the vessel that those lights were attached to. He said it appeared to be 60 feet long. Now, the eyewitness did agree, however, on what happened next. As they all watched, the lights raced toward the harbor, and then they plummeted downward, rushing toward the waves, and came to a stop right at the horizon. That night, 11 different phone calls came in about this object crashing into the water. Now, by this point, most of the witnesses who called the operator and the officers themselves assumed that it had been a plane that had plummeted into the harbor. It seemed like the most logical conclusion, right? So when the RCMP get out to Shag Harbor, they found a huge crowd of people already gathered on the shore. Now, the good news was that the aircraft had not completely sunk yet, but it was about a half-mile away from the shore, and there was no easy way to get to it without a lot of boats. Now, although the night was dark, all of the witnesses could still see a strange yellow foam coming off the wreckage. It had a strong smell like sulfur. The object had changed shape, almost like it had some kind of shape-shifting ability, and it transformed in preparation for its crash into the water. The RCMP coordinated with the Coast Guard and other volunteers who owned boats like Norman and his family, and they all sped out to the wreck. But by the time they got there, it was too late. However, it wasn't totally gone without a trace. Remember, the yellow foam was still floating on the water's surface, and it still had a very strong smell. Now, the next morning, when it was bright enough to get into the water safely, the searches resumed. The authorities also sent 7 divers to see if they could recover anything from the wreck, scouring the water. And it was like this downed vessel had never existed. Like it had just literally driven away. The downed vessel, whatever it was, kept traveling after it slipped underwater. At least that's what we think it did. Now, you may remember 12-year-old Chris Stiles. Chris became very interested in UFOs. At one point, he actually tracked down one of the scuba divers who'd been searching for wreckage. He only agreed to talk to Chris if he'd keep his identity anonymous. But he told Chris something interesting years later. All of their dives that day and in the days that followed were for show. Government officials already knew at that point that the downed airship had moved on. It was parked on the ocean floor about 25 miles northeast of Shag Harbor. At some point, a second vessel dove to the ocean floor and joined the original one, almost like it was there to help it. And all the while, the Canadian Navy sat and waited to see what would happen next. In mid-October, or about a week after the crash, a Russian submarine had been spotted in their territory. They had to go confront the Russian submarine. And while they were busy with it, the 2 airships rose to the ocean's surface and they burst out of water and flew away. And that same day, there were more strange sightings elsewhere in Canada. People saw mysterious lights in the sky that they couldn't identify, and all of the witness reports were extremely similar to what the people of Shag Harbor had seen. Now again, all of this evidence we have comes from unofficial reports and an interview with an anonymous witness. So of course it may not be true. But a few years ago, another diver came forward with more information that might help corroborate this account. His name was David Svet, and he wasn't part of the original search team. And he said that when he swam down toward the ocean floor, he found something pretty strange. He saw these circular depressions on the ground. It looked like someone had taken a round object about the size of a dinner plate and pressed it against the rocks and the sand, leaving an impression in the soft sand. Except these depressions were a foot deep. They were perfectly uniform and perfectly empty, except for these little pebbles that dotted the bottom. The residents of Shag Harbor didn't know anything about any of the military operations that were going on 25 miles away from the crash site. The crash that night and the amount of people that saw it and the RCMP responding, that's real. That's documented. That actually happened. Despite all of these findings, the locals still stuck to what seemed like the most likely explanation. Everyone still thought the craft that had crashed into the water was an airplane, even though a lot of the witness reports didn't fit with what you'd expect from a plane. They don't change shape when they hit the water, and at that time in the 1960s, they didn't hover in place like the craft that the pilot saw in the air. They also couldn't go from 0 to 2,000 miles per hour in an instant. Now, some people thought the vehicle could have been a top secret military plane, but a new possibility emerged 2 or 3 days after this crash went down. That's when newspapers began printing headlines about how a UFO had crashed into Shag Harbor. And for the first time, the locals started considering the possibility that the aircraft might have actually been from outer space. The eyewitnesses were afraid they'd sound irrational if they went on the news to talk about aliens or that they didn't think this was from Earth. So the story kind of fizzled out. Take Peter Gorman, the 13-year-old boy who almost saw the light hit his house a little after midnight. He told his parents exactly what had happened the day after the crash, but by then they had to know that something had hit the water and that search teams were still looking for it. His parents doubted him anyway. Given the way they reacted, Peter felt like he couldn't tell anyone else either. He did give a statement to the police because he felt like that was the right thing to do, but after that, he decided to never speak about it again. He kept his secret for decades. Peter spoke up for the first time in 2013. Now, one more interesting detail about this case is that a lot of the time when you hear a UFO sighting, you also hear about various attempts to explain it away or try to cover cover it up. Government investigators may get involved and say the flying vessel was a trick of the light, a weather balloon, a hoax, but this time around, none of that happened. So a group called the Condon Committee even looked into the Shag Harbor incident. The investigators had looked into countless reports and tried to find explanations for what was really going on. And after they heard about the Shag Harbor incident, they couldn't come up with any way to explain what all of those people had seen. That makes the Shag Harbor incident one of the history's most compelling UFO stories. So it may be no surprise today that Shag Harbor is one of the most famous UFO sites in all of Canada. In 2001, the government issued a special postage stamp with a picture of a flying saucer hovering over the ocean, and it had the words Shag Harbor printed over it. And more recently, in 2019, the officials issued a commemorative coin. So every year, the people of Shag Harbor host a UFO conference in their town. If you were to head to the crash site today, you'd see a small, easy to miss sign by a gazebo that says, "Site of 1967 UFO incident." Now, the good news is that attitudes about UFOs and unexplained incidents seem to kind of be changing. Even the US government has acknowledged that there are objects in the sky that can't fully be explained. That might be a sign of shifting opinions. And unsolved cases like the Shag Harbor incident can help bring us one step closer to the truth.